We're going to talk about Joseph R. McCarthy. Born on November 14th, 1908. He graduated from college, became a circuit court judge from 1939, and he left that to join the Marine Corps in World War II. What's interesting about McCarthy is he didn't have to do that. He was eligible for an exemption because he was a circuit court judge. He didn't have to go into service. But he went into the United States Marine Corps, and he went and he took a job, one of the more dangerous jobs you could possibly imagine. He was the tail gunner on American fighter planes. Right? And then he came back from the war, and he won a seat in the United States Senate in 1947, and he served until he died in 1957. Okay, now, he was an ardent foe of communism. He first spoke out about communism in government in February 9 of 1950 in a speech that he gave in Wheeling, West Virginia. And he immediately became the target of traitors in government posts who were either communists themselves or they were fellow travelers, as we call them, friends of communists. He got friendly with James Forrestal. James Forrestal was the first to serve as the United States Secretary of Defense. Up until 1947, we had the Secretary of War. When we had the Secretary of War, we won all the wars. When we had the Secretary of Defense and started playing defense, we didn't win anything anymore, right? So Forrestal was about ready to leave his post as the first Secretary of Defense. He intended to buy a newspaper in New York City, and he was going to blow the lid off all of the traitors in government in Washington, D.C. and throughout the country. He's the one that told McCarthy that our nation was losing to communism not because of incompetence or stupidity. He said consistency has never been a mark of stupidity. If they were merely stupid, they would occasionally make a mistake in our favor. That's good thinking, right? Well, I should mention here that he died mysteriously on May 22nd, 1949. He went in the hospital at Bethesda in Maryland, Bethesda Naval Hospital, and he supposedly jumped out the window of the 17th floor and committed suicide. But we eventually, in the John Birch Society, published a book called The Death of James Forrestal, highly questioning whether or not it was suicide and whether or not he was pushed. Right? I believe he was pushed. I can't prove it, but the book is very compelling. It's called The Death of James Forrestal. If you can find an old copy of it and read it, it's a small book, and I think you'll find it very interesting. But remember now, he told Senator McCarthy that we were losing to communism not because of incompetence or stupidity. We were losing because of deliberate treachery on the part of people in high positions in government. Right? So McCarthy's revelations, McCarthy's statements led to a congressional committee given the task of investigating communist penetration of our government. Instead, it became an investigation of McCarthy by fellow senators. And they did a job on McCarthy, but he kept plugging at it. He wanted other government agencies to investigate penetration of our country, and they refused. So he took it on himself. And when the names were demanded of him, he said, if I should label one man a communist when he is not a communist, I think that would be very bad. Okay? That's just totally the opposite opinion that has been spread about Joe McCarthy. He supposedly was wildly condemning all kinds of people as being communists or communist sympathizers, and they said he had no evidence and so forth. Well, the fact was he never named anybody until later when he had the power of a committee chairman. All those he eventually named, however, were indeed communists or members of communist groups, and that was proven. In 1953, McCarthy is in what you might call his heyday. on July 3rd of 1953, the Senate Internal Security Subcommittee, that he was not a part of, released a report called Interlocking Subversion in Government Departments. Under a headline claiming 2 Soviet rings not exposed, the SIS report published the belief that there were 4 Soviet espionage rings operating within our government and only 2 had been exposed. That report inspired McCarthy to continue his campaign to rid the government of disloyal personnel. Now, in 1956, J. Edgar Hoover, the head of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, I used this quote in the talk I gave this morning. He said, "Yet the individual is handicapped by coming face to face with a conspiracy so monstrous he cannot believe it exists. The American mind simply has not come to a realization of the evil which has been introduced into our midst." Right? Robert Welch, of course, said the communist movement is only a tool of the total conspiracy. Robert Welch had not yet formed the John Birch Society in the heyday of McCarthy. McCarthy actually died before the society was formed. And we contend in the Birch Society that if it had been formed and if it had taken off the way it did once it was formed, that McCarthy would have been far more successful and probably would have gotten a lot more of the rats out of Washington. Now here's what happened. Here's a Merriam-Webster College dictionary, and it's defining McCarthyism. And it's totally wrong, right? But it said this. It said a mid-20th century political attitude characterized by opposition to elements held to be subversive and by the use of tactics involving personal attacks on individuals by means of widely publicized indiscriminate allegations, especially on the basis of unsubstantiated charges. Now, that is totally false, and yet McCarthy had to face that kind of thing. And that's what you will find if you go to a dictionary today. See, this dictionary was 1966. Other dictionaries have come out since that time, and they're still condemning McCarthy. Right? Now, the results of McCarthy's misbehavior are interesting. The number killed, none. The number wounded or tortured, none. The number arrested without warrant, none. The number imprisoned without trial, none. The number deprived of due process, none. The number exiled or deported, none. The number falsely accused, none. That's the record. And it's that record that people don't want the American people to understand. They still want to tell you that McCarthy was a devil. Right? The results of McCarthy's efforts: 81 government personnel that were dismissed or quit. Many others remained at their posts, and he intended to continue. Then the Senate decided to put McCarthy on trial, not the communists. They condemned him by a vote of 67 to 22. And the ridiculous charges for which they condemned him had absolutely nothing to do with his investigation of communism. They condemned him for not appearing before a subcommittee when he never received its request to appear. In fact, he was told to appear on a particular date, and he was on a hunting trip in northern Wisconsin at the time. He never got the message, and he was condemned for not appearing, and it wasn't an order that he appear. It was a please come. It was a suggestion. And the second thing that he was condemned for is speaking harshly about fellow senators. Well, if you add up all of the things that have been said about Joe McCarthy over the years, they far outweigh any harsh statement he ever made. He called one general a disgrace to his uniform, justified. He called another senator a faker, justified. And for that, he was punished and condemned by the Senate. In 2007, a book came out about Senator Joseph McCarthy, written by journalist M. Stanton Evans after 6 years of research and investigation. His book, Blacklisted by History, The Untold Story of Senator Joe McCarthy, is a book I highly recommend. Right? And it's an accounting of what this one senator valiantly tried to do. Right? Blacklisted by History. I got to know Stan Evans, and he was a friend. He was down in Washington running an organization to train young people to be journalists. Now, after the Soviet Union went down, that would have been around 1989, 1990, its files in Moscow were soon open for scrutiny. The information in those files proved that McCarthy was correct in targeting, even understating, the number of traitors in America who were never punished for their disloyalty to our country. Now, the Venona Project was not a Russian thing, it was an American thing. And it ended in 1980. But once it ended, the files were still there. And when the Soviet Union imploded, they were able to go and to verify what the Venona papers had actually put together 10 and more years ago. The John Birch Society, as I said, was not yet formed. Robert Welch and older members of the John Birch Society believed that Senator McCarthy would have been more successful had there been a John Birch Society, which wasn't formed until December of 1958. With no national organization providing support, he was literally hounded to an early death at age 48. He died in 1957. Conclusion. Senator Joseph McCarthy was an exemplary American, not someone to be scorned. The words best describing him are American hero. Right? And he's certainly one of my heroes. I don't know, I would guess some of you are aware of the fact that I served for 3 years in the United States Marine Corps as an officer, and I wore my Marine Corps shirt. I also have a Marine Corps hat. I don't have any Marine Corps pajamas. But this is a kind of a short glimpse of a very great American named Joseph McCarthy. I highly commend him. Now, the John Birch Society was formed in 1958 and headquartered in Belmont, Massachusetts, a suburb of Boston. And the reason it was there is that's where Robert Welch lived. He simply went down to a building close to the post office in Belmont, and he rented space, and that's where, and eventually a good friend in California bought the building for the society. But later on, we had changes in the leadership, and a man named Alan Buboltz became the CEO of the society. And at that point, Mr. Buboltz was told by the board of directors that we have expensive facilities East Coast at Belmont, Massachusetts, and West Coast, San Marino, California, a Los Angeles suburb. And we can't afford the two, and we have a lot of duplication. What we want to do, we want you to shut down the two offices and find a location somewhere in the country that the society can relocate to. So Mr. Buboltz asked, well, where do you want me to go? And he said, well, that's up to you. You're the CEO, you pick a place. Alan Buboltz's hometown is Appleton, Wisconsin. That's why we're in Appleton, Wisconsin. Appleton, Wisconsin also happens to be the hometown of Joe McCarthy, right? And a lot of people said, well, you moved to Appleton, Wisconsin because of McCarthy. I said, no, that's not the reason, not at all. It was never considered, but it's a nice, happy consequence, a nice, happy development. So I contend that McCarthy was a hero, and I've taken many people out to the gravesite in Appleton. At the cemetery there's a beautiful headstone. My friend Don has been there, and we took some pictures. I think they were trying to find the pictures to bring tonight, but they didn't. But anyhow, Joe McCarthy was a true American hero, and whenever you hear his name soiled, and you probably will hear it, right? A lot of people who don't know any better are relying on dictionaries, and you can't rely on dictionaries anymore like you could before. Don't let them get away with it. just say, okay, you don't like McCarthy, what did he do that was so wrong? And they'll start talking about the kinds of things that that dictionary definition said, that he tarnished good people, that he used offensive tactics against people and so on. Never did it. Never did it. Never even came close. All right, so there's a little look at Senator Joe McCarthy, and I'm glad to be able to. You got a question over there? Okay, what is it?
Stand up. I'd like to bring to light the fact that earlier in the year I was on a school field trip to the Constitution Center in Philadelphia, and there was a section where they have the whole entire Constitution in pane and glass up at the top, and they have a bunch of history channel programs going on. And so it was supposed to be like a great constitutionalist American establishment, and literally under the Second Amendment there was a giant screen playing anti-McCarthyism propaganda.
They did it.
How horrible it was.
Yeah.
So,
I'm not surprised, but it infuriates me to know that continues to go on. Question here.
What was the normal response to McCarthy when he was doing what he did?
Well, the normal response was, oh, it's too bad he didn't clean up his act before he died, that kind of stuff.
No, while he was giving those speeches about communism.
Well, while he was giving his speech about communism, a lot of the senators, a lot of the government officials and everything were impeding what he was trying to do. One of his times when he was trying to give a report, he was interrupted, I think, something like 90 times in about a half an hour by somebody just trying to make it difficult for him to proceed. Oh, but let me go back to one of the. I don't know which one I wanted. It's the dictionary definition.
back to it. Good.
Well, anyhow, try to remember, if you're interested in the subject, that book, Blacklisted by History, is a very, very important book, and I commend it to your attention. So with that said, thank you very much.